Texas abortion trigger law went into effect on August 25th. What does this mean for women in the state of Texas?
This law was actually signed in 2001 in anticipation of Roe v. Wade being overturned. With this law, their abortions are now illegal across the state of Texas, and there's no exceptions for rape or incest. There is an exception if it's deemed that the mother's life is gravely endangered. But with doctors facing life in prison and fines up to $100,000, I predict that we're going to see an increase in maternal deaths across the state of Texas.
And so how does this further exacerbate issues such as sex trafficking and maternal morality?
I think that for me, I believe that human sex trafficking victims will be the silent victims of this crisis. Texas ranks in the top 3 in the nation for human sex trafficking. We also have a maternity mortality rate that's comparable to some developing nations. So let me put that into perspective. If you are a pregnant Black woman in the state of Texas, you are 3 more times likely to die during childbirth. And let's just sit there for a minute and think about that. The Texas abortion ban will have a compounding effect on both of these issues, both of which disproportionately affect Black women.
I can definitely say for minority population, even Hispanic women, that there is a higher risk of those pregnancies. And one of the key things is that a lot of Black women are not getting those prenatal visits until later in the pregnancy because they find out later. So they might already be 15 weeks pregnant or something and have a high-risk pregnancy and maybe don't even know about it, on and on. So can you kind of jump in and give us a male perspective of where men fall into these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, when you look at this ridiculous ban that's been put in place, it's devastating because it affects us all. You know, whenever I go and I play basketball with my friends, or if I'm, in the barbershop or whatever, and we have these conversations, the biggest thing that I've been seeing is that a lot of folks that are not politicos, they might not really understand the true nature of what is going on. They might not understand about, the fact that if you are about to go through a miscarriage in side of the state of Texas, there's a lot of doctors out there that have to check with their legal department of whether or not they can decide they can give, life-saving care. This is a reality that when you frame that into the minds of everyday people, they're more willing to get out and say, hey, you know what, that's messed up. Because the way to trigger a response from people, as what I've seen, is to make it personal for them. Make it to where they can see the picture inside of their own lives, and they're going to be more than ready to be allies and advocates to stand up for our women that are going through such a ridiculous overreach by our government.
And thank you for that input, Isaiah, because I think a lot of times we sort of exclude men from these conversations because we're always like, you don't have a uterus, you shouldn't have a say so, so I feel that's so awesome. And I'm really touched to know that you guys are having those conversations, even though we may not include you all the time. The fact that you guys are having these conversations is very enlightening. And definitely we feel like you guys are on our side. What would you say to voters that are concerned about their reproductive rights, Isaiah?
Well, I would say that, in the words of Senator Louise Lucas up in Virginia, that the goal this November is for us to come together to put a brick wall in several different states to stop the GOP-led attacks on reproductive freedom, letting them know that if they simply vote, not just for themselves, but if they say, hey, you know what? I have 10 friends that I see every single day. Let's all make sure that number 1, they're registered. Number 2, that they understand what's going on. And number 3, they know where their polling places are, that they can make a difference in the trajectory of this state and the difference of someone's lives that they don't know and someone who they do know personally just by getting out and voting.
So can you give us an idea also of like what they're doing for this younger generation on the campus to kind of push these people to make sure you're voting?
A lot of the young generation, they know what's going on, but they don't really know what to do about it. What is the solution for it? All right. So when we get into their faces, I was actually talking to, believe it or not, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and she was telling me one of the biggest activators to get people excited and get them to vote is to actually just ask them to vote.
Right.
So it's going around telling people, hey, the election is in a few months, it's time to register. So what they've been doing, they've been going around to students with voter registration cards, getting them actually registered to vote. And just last week, I know they registered 200 people to vote just like that.
Republicans have been working tirelessly to overturn Roe v. Wade, over the past 50 years, which means they were working during the Clinton administration. They were working during the Obama administration. And here we are today with a Democratic president reaping the results of having Republican extremists in power making laws about our lives.
Honestly, when I went to the women's rally like 2 months ago, there were people there that 50 years ago were fighting for Roe versus Wade, and now they're 50.
Yeah.
It's only 50 years later. All their work is has been undone. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
people have to realize in politics and what we're doing. It's ongoing. It's not just all of a sudden today, poof, now you get this. Like that can be going next
Yeah.
election. That can be.
I want to piggyback on that real quick because I heard Stacey Abrams say something that was really, really motivating for me. And I think it was really good just to tell people voting is like medicine. You have to keep on taking it. That's the way that we make real change. I think sometimes in my generation, sometimes people think that change just happens overnight, that with the stroke of a pen, everything can just go away. But it is a consistent battle.
Communities. How can we engage our elected officials to fight for us?
I think that the biggest way to make sure that our elected officials are engaged is through the participation in primary elections. I think that a lot of times and I can say in my younger days when I was probably 18 or so, I would fall into this trap myself. Is where I would say, whatever happens in the primary, what happens in the primary, but I'm voting in the general. And that's a very bad mistake to make because that's where you really hold elected officials accountable. You ask them, did you follow through with what you promised?